Good afternoon and welcome to the Dr. Bob Shillman Conference Center here at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and welcome to our discussion, Turkey's one-man show, Erdogan's Agenda After Davutoğlu. Just a quick note or two of housekeeping. We first ask that you set your cell phones to stun, turn them off, just make sure they don't interrupt our discussion today. I want to welcome members of the press, members of the diplomatic corps, and I want to remind everyone that we are going to be hearing a wide range of views today. We want to make sure that everybody is heard and everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the discussion. In the meantime, I just also want to make note of the fact that FDD is very proud to have a growing Turkey program. This is something that we've been developing over the last several years. We have looked into everything from Turkey's politics to some of the illicit financial activity that we've been noting there in the country as well. We've been growing. We have with us our latest addition to the Turkey program, Mr. Aykan Erdemir, Dr. Aykan Erdemir, who has just joined us several months ago. But for now, I want to hand the program over to FDD Senior Counselor John Hanna, who will be presiding today and asking the first round of questions before you get a chance to jump in as well. So thank you again for being here. John?
Thank you, John. Thank you very much, and welcome, everybody. Let me also note that we're very proud to be sponsoring this event in coordination with our good friends and allies at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Blaise Mishtal is here, and so that's a very fruitful cooperation for us. Let me first introduce our panelists today. They're really an outstanding group. John mentioned my colleague Aykan Erdemir. Aykan is, as Jonathan said, a senior fellow here at FDD, and he's a former Turkish parliamentarian. And I also want to say that we're very proud that Aykan is also the recipient of the 2016 Stephanos Prize for Religious Freedom, which he was awarded to him earlier this year in Europe, and a founding member of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion and Belief. Next to Aykan, we have Dr. Gonul is the founding director of the Middle East Institute's Center for Turkish Studies. She's also an adjunct professor at George Washington University's Institute for Middle East Studies. I think this is the first time we've been privileged to have you here on one of our panels. So we, yeah, okay. But anyway, thank you for, second? Okay, thank you very much for being here. And then my old friend Alan Makovsky is with us. Alan is
old in both senses of the term.
Old in both senses, right? Both in age and our relationship. We date each other. It goes back a long way. Alan is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He served as a senior professional staff member for the House Foreign Affairs Committee for a number of years, worked for several of the chairmen at the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then also served for more than a decade as an expert on Southeastern Europe and the Middle East at the State Department and other capacities for the U.S. government. I should also say that in addition to my work here at FDD, I'm also a proud advisor to FDD's Turkey Board of Advisors for its Turkey program, and I'm also a member, together with Alan, we're members of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Turkey task force, which has also done a lot of good and important work. There's so many possible questions to ask about Turkey. It seems that every time we get together, we're kind of chronicling the continued negative slide of the Turkish body politic and Turkey's position both within its region, vis-a-vis its own citizens, and vis-a-vis large parts of the world, including obviously Russia and issues with Europe and the United States. And on May the 5th, we had another, what seems like a big event, essentially the dismissal of an elected Turkish prime minister and the head of the AKP party, at least nominally, by President Erdogan. So again, it feels like we may be entering some new waters here, and although it also doesn't feel like we won't be sitting here 3 or 4 months from now and also be talking about some new event in Turkey that is a cause for a real concern. So, Aykan, why don't I start with you? Let's talk about Davutoğlu's dismissal. What happened on May the 15th? I should say that I think one of the last times that we were here talking, it was right after the November elections, in which the AKP party, of course, was returned to its majority. And you had a very interesting thought at that point in time, and I want to read it back to you. You said, these elections failed to provide Erdogan with the supermajority he needed to bestow upon himself the executive presidential powers he covets. Prime Minister Davutoğlu, however, has won a significant victory, proving his leadership skills and strengthening his credentials within AKP. Can these two leaders continue to work in harmony, you asked? Will Davutoğlu feel tired of working under the tutelage and shadow of Erdogan? If the two fail to arrive at a modus vivendi about the future parameters of power sharing, election celebrations could soon lead to brutal infighting in AKP ranks, adding further fuel to Turkey's political chaos and conflict. Pretty prescient. That was November 3rd of last year, or November 2nd, immediately after the elections. So I wonder if I can ask you to take it off from there. Describe for us what did occur on May 15th and how you understand those events.
Yes, let me start by thanking President Erdogan because he redeemed my predictions. Because most people, when I wrote that piece for Politico Europe, the takeaways from the Turkish elections, they thought it was wishful thinking from a former opposition MP. But I thought it was sound analysis because this was a disaster in the making. There were structural reasons why this was bound to happen, and it only took 6.5 months before this partnership collapsed into pieces. And to put that in perspective, to put also May 5th in perspective, let's remember two moments in Erdogan's string of victories. Now, when we take a retrospective look at his career, we see many victories. But also that string of victories happened to have some failures. And two failures, which don't look as failures, is the 2011 elections and the 2015 November elections. Because in both elections, which were strong wins for Erdogan, he actually failed to get a supermajority. And ideally, as early as 2011, June 2011, and as late as November 2015, Erdogan would have had the supermajority to transform Turkish political system into an executive presidential one. So since he failed that, I think the structural tension built into the Turkish political system, that is the tension between a strong executive prime minister who controls the budget as well as executive decisions, and a symbolic head of state, that is the president, were bound to end in disaster. I think Erdogan thought that he could still make it work through a de facto arrangement. So there was the pretension that this was a de facto presidential system and things would work out fine until it was transformed into a de jure presidential system. But May 5th, I think, showed us that it didn't work well, and that Erdogan, nevertheless, still called all the shots within the AKP. And Davutoğlu could only last for a week. You know, the moment this Erdogan coup, the palace coup, took off with the release or with the Pelican Brief expose, pointing the finger to the treachery of Prime Minister Davutoğlu. Davutoğlu and his team lasted only a week, which shows that Erdogan not only controls Turkey as a one-man ruler, but also calls all the shots within the AKP. And Davutoğlu was pretty much a paper tiger within the AKP. And I think it was finally, this paper tiger image was finally solidified when on Saturday, Prime Minister Davutoğlu, alongside former President Gül, who I have characterized as timid, as kind of not having the courage and the guts to go against Erdogan, they both joined President Erdogan in the wedding ceremony of his daughter and acted as witnesses to the wedding, which Turkey's criminologists would argue that are two now former leaders basically bowing down to Erdogan and recognizing his ultimate power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can you just then explain, I mean, if that's the case, if he's that, you know, slavish in his obedience to Erdogan, to have been humiliated like this and nevertheless show up at his family's wedding, what actually caused the disruption? Why could Erdogan not tolerate this? Why wasn't he able to put Davutoğlu into line? What was the real cause in his mind of why he had to get rid of this guy?
Yes. I call it the outcome of the actions of a control freak, because Davutoğlu was 90% aligned with Erdogan. But for Erdogan, nothing less than 100% works. Now, the rumor in town is that Binali Yıldırım, the right-hand man of President Erdogan, and also believed to be in control of his slush funds, will replace Davutoğlu, and probably son-in-law Berat Albayrak will be in charge of the economy. So if this duo ends up being the new leadership in the AKP and also in the Council of Ministers, then Erdogan will have two yes men representing the government, and I think that's what he wants, because he can then move on full speed with his presidential plans. So whether it means first lifting of immunities, then either a forcing of a constitutional change or snap elections, we'll see. But at least the party and its leadership will be fully aligned with Erdogan, and they will be as devoted to this transformation as Erdogan himself.
Gonul, do you have anything you want to add to that? And can I just start you by asking, is this a type of decision? Would Erdogan have consulted anybody about this kind of decision, or just something he's made purely on his own and called Davutoğlu in and sent him packing?
Well, Erdogan rarely consults anyone, and if you look at his advisors, his personalities, they're all yes men, and that's one of the reasons why Davutoğlu, I think Davutoğlu, he wanted to carve out an independent space for himself, especially in foreign policy, and that was one of the main problems. I mean, he went ahead with an EU deal that was not fully supported by Erdogan, and he, for instance, he wanted to have a meeting with Obama only a few weeks after Erdogan had a meeting with the US president. So he apparently, I mean, domestically, he does not have power. He doesn't have the autonomy, Davutoğlu, and he doesn't have the popularity within the AKP constituency. And that was one of the reasons why Erdogan picked Davutoğlu to be the next prime minister, because he doesn't have the backing. So he could not oppose. That was the assumption, that he could not oppose his authority. But I think, and Davutoğlu wanted to play that role in foreign policy. And that was a mistake on Davutoğlu's part. So I don't think that's how Erdogan functions. That's his MO. He doesn't really, he has his own agenda, and at this point I think the number one item on his agenda is the presidential system. And everything he does, I think the politics of the entire country is shaped and determined by that agenda. So he makes his decisions based on that. So there were problems, and we've seen that, I mean, since Davutoğlu became the prime minister, I agree with Aykan that he was a shadow prime minister, but he still wanted to be his own man. And we've seen several instances where he really wanted to be an autonomous prime minister. There was, for instance, there was a bill that he introduced on the corruption case that was rebuked publicly by Erdogan. and he had a softer approach on the Kurdish question. For instance, just hours after he said that we can maybe go back to the negotiations with the PKK, Erdogan said that's not possible. With the EU deal also, Erdogan thought that he made too many concessions. And there are several other issues that the two did not really see eye to eye, and that has become a major problem. But I think the biggest problem that the two had was Davutoğlu never, and understandably so, never prioritized the presidential system. So that was the main problem, and that just tells you how Erdogan functions, that he wants presidentialism to be run the country as a one-man show, and he saw Davutoğlu as not 100% behind that plan. So I don't think he consulted anyone, and that was a decision that he made on his own and for his own reasons. And I think from now on we'll see fewer voices. Not that Davutoğlu played that role effectively, but he tried. So we'll see Erdogan's power more consolidated moving forward.
Alan, is there anything interesting at all to say about any of the reaction to what happened on May the 5th, either amongst other elites, other parties, the military, the Turkish public, the media? How has this whole thing been presented inside of Turkey?
Well, I think now that it has happened, first of all, let me just back up for a moment. I just wanted to say how pleased I am to be on a panel with both Aykan and Gonul, as well as you, John. But particularly, Gonul is very young, but now you've been here in Washington for a few years, and I've been here for a long, long time, and it's really great to have Aykan as an addition to the Turkey watching community here. I just wanted to say that. Look, I think once it happened, the sense was it was inevitable. And I think it was in many ways. I'll just underscore what Gonul has just said. The key issue for Erdogan is the presidency, the strong presidency. And it was clear that Davutoğlu had no interest in this project. I mean, after all, it would take him out of a job, or at least would remove his authority immediately after the June elections last year. Davutoğlu, unlike Erdogan, made clear that he wanted to go into coalition with CHP, which certainly would have killed the presidency issue. And he also said the presidency issue is off the table. That was a very strong statement, I thought. Really,
when did he say that? Was it
after the June?
Right after June.
The June elections. So I think it was, in retrospect, it was always a matter of time. The issue was really when, and I think people were surprised by the timing. And the triggers were probably, I mean, of course, I kind of mentioned the Pelican brief, the text that was put on a website listing all of Davutoğlu's sins. But Erdogan made clear he wants to move now on this presidency issue. They want to do a constitutional amendment very soon, while Bahçeli is still in control of the MHP. The MHP has become somewhat of an ally of Erdogan's, but is a little bit, its leadership is shaky right now. So they have all talked about going forward with an amendment to pave the way for a new constitution. This amendment would remove the clause in the Turkish constitution that says a Turkish president has to resign from his party. It would no longer have to be above party. Also, it says he would be an executive, not just the head of the state. I think the decision to go forward with it soon necessitated removing Davutoğlu, and also the other key trigger, which Aykan referred to, I'm sorry, Gonul. I think this report that he was going to go to Washington had to be extremely upsetting to Erdogan. I mean, what did Erdogan do after he was elected in November '02, after his party was elected? He was, for certain technical reasons, he was not yet officially the head of the party. Or he was the head of the party, but he wasn't elected to parliament.
Elected,
He was not prime minister. He immediately made a trip to Europe and then to Washington. And I think most people would agree what he was trying to do was line up international support as a shield against any sort of military intervention. So I think he understands how a politician can use international affairs in domestic affairs. And the report that there was going to be a meeting in Washington on May 5th, I'm sure was very upsetting. Now, this was never, to my knowledge, officially announced by any government, but Davutoğlu's people did background after the crisis began that led to his ultimate resignation, did background the press and say, well, we've now had to postpone this trip because of President Obama's and Vice President Biden's schedule. So just to wrap up, in retrospect, I think most people saw it as inevitable. But I don't think many people guessed the timing.
Aykan, Alan mentioned the MHP issue, and it's an interesting one, and Erdogan's role in all of that, and Bahçeli's role. Can you just describe what's happening in that corner of the Turkish political universe?
It is indeed surprising because MHP is one party where they have an understanding of leadership that the leader leaves office when he dies. But right now, it's unheard of that there are 4 candidates for MHP leadership. And Bahçeli is probably feeling extremely insecure. And the more insecure he feels, the more he's pushed towards Erdogan. Because ultimately what allows Devlet Bahçeli, the MHP leader, to hold on to his seat is the clandestine support that Erdogan provides. How? Probably by buying some delegates to keep him as the party leader. Also using his influence at some local level courts to block the extraordinary party congress. And finally this weekend, by using the riot police to block MHP candidates from entering into the auditorium where the extraordinary congress was to be held. So basically what we are seeing today is Erdogan not only calls all the shots within the AKP, but he is now even controlling the MHP by blocking a legitimate extraordinary party congress from taking place because he's too afraid that if Bahçeli goes, his closest ally in this game will be gone. And Bahçeli is, as of last week, announced that he's not only willing to provide support to Erdogan's desires, but he even said we can provide legal help. And then when he was asked to clarify that, it means entering into a grand coalition, kind of. So MHP of today, that is MHP of Bahçeli, it seems, is now willing to play the game as Erdogan wants them to play. And this, to me, is, of course, a very worrying sign that Erdogan knows no boundaries when it comes to designing Turkish politics, because before, he was trying to make a quote-unquote legitimate point from his own point of view. He was saying, I'm an elected president, and I should still be in charge of my former party. And there were some in Turkey who said, oh, maybe we should take care of that business. But today, there is no legitimate grounds on which to argue that Erdogan should also control who runs the MHP and what MHP's policies should be. So increasingly, Turkey is turning into a one-party state, and the president, who is still technically non-partisan, tries to call all the shots for all the parties.
Gonul, I'm sorry, Alan,
Could
you
I
want to
just
get
make
in on
a
this?
too, because I'm not sure. I know most people, or many people, are very Turkey knowledgeable, but maybe not everybody is. In talking about this importance of AKP, MHP cooperative effort on amendments, just the parliamentary arithmetic is important. You need 330 votes to pass an amendment and bring it to referendum. You need 367 to just pass it, a constitutional amendment. Erdogan only has 317. So he's 317, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
13
So
short.
316 now, someone left? Yeah, so he's 317 at the time of the election. Anyway, so he's 13 short. If he has MHP, or at least a chunk of MHP has 40 votes. So that would be enough to get him over the 330 mark and pass a constitutional amendment and bring it to popular referendum. I just wanted to clarify that because I wasn't sure everybody understood the influence.
No, thank you. Has everybody agreed that that's the most likely route that Erdogan will take? And is there a sense of timing on how soon that could occur? Does it all depend on his cooperation with Baceli, or what are the factors that might inhibit him?
Good.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think he could also call for early elections. I mean, as long as Baceli remains the MHP leader, I think he can move forward. Erdogan can move forward with his presidential plans. He could either call for early elections, and in that case, the MHP, it's going to be very difficult for the MHP to pass the 10% threshold, and that could give him the supermajority in the parliament.
Right.
So that's one of the options. Or if he decides, of course, it all depends on public opinion surveys. We don't know. Turkey has been in an election cycle for a long time. So if he decides that this is going to affect his chances, if he calls for early elections, if it's not a popular decision, then he might opt for moving forward with the MHP backing, which he will have.
For the constitutional amendment or the referendum? For the referendum. Yeah, but then
first the parliament has to pass the
right,
amendment.
the amendment, and then they take it to the people. And the
Yeah.
likely result of that is
Look,
uncertain as
both
well.
paths are fraught with risk. I mean, because public opinion polls still show that a majority of the public opposes this super presidency. The numbers have narrowed. Maybe I've seen polls that have been as much as, or as little as a 10% gap between yes and no, and you'd only need a majority vote in the referendum to pass it. But it's fraught with risk. On the other hand, if he went to the new elections, yes, there's a chance that both MHP and the Kurdish-dominated party, HDP, would fall below the 10% threshold, which is necessary to get into parliament. That would mean he would get a bigger piece of the pie. He could get well over 367 parliamentarians and just pass a new constitution or an amendment, however he wanted to do it. But right now, the polls show that both MHP and HDP are kind of on the cusp. They could get over. So if the elections were held today, it's not a sure thing that he could get that supermajority.
Just on the HDP, what is the status now of their parliamentarians, their issues of immunity and removing it, and where does that stand? And then if you could just say a few words about what's happened and how it affects the mess that is occurring in between Turkey and the PKK and the Southeast and all of that.
Let me start with your last question. I think after June elections, everyone thought that it was a historic victory, which it was. The HDP captured 13%, historic 13%, and I think HDP leader did a great job. He campaigned on a broader democratic platform. So he presented his party as not just an ethnic-oriented party, but a party that could, in fact, become a party that could represent Turkish left. So he could be able to appeal to non-Kurdish segments of the country, and that's how he could be able to capture 13%. So he could be able to do that because he not only appealed to the Turks in the West, but also he could be appealed to the conservative Kurds who have traditionally voted for the AKP. But after June elections, many thought that he could be in a very tough spot. Because yes, it was a historic victory. Now the HDP had many seats in the parliament. But on the other hand, he had a dilemma. The HDP leader had a dilemma. he had to deliver to different and conflicting constituencies. On the one hand, those who voted for him in the West voted for him mainly because they thought that he distanced himself from the PKK. But those who voted for him within the Kurdish constituency voted for him because they thought that this was their only chance, and this was a historic moment for the Kurdish movement in the region, especially after what's been happening in Rojava in northern Syria. So they thought that now this is Kurds' moment, and he could take that moment, that could become something else. So that was the expectation. So there were two constituencies with different demands. And of course, the expected happened, and Selahattin Demirtas, the HDP leader, found himself in a very tough spot. But that wasn't the only problem. I mean, balancing those different demands was difficult enough, but also the PKK resumed the fighting. And that gave Erdogan an opportunity to marginalize the HDP. So on the one hand, you have a pro-Kurdish party that captured 13%, and that was supposed to be the strongest moment in its history. But on the other hand, after the fighting with the PKK resumed in July, we've seen a more marginalized HDP. There were physical attacks on their local offices, and there was constantly the pro-government media attacked the HDP leader. So he not only lost the Western votes, he also lost the votes of the conservative Kurds, who thought that he could not deliver. But he was cornered, so he was in no place to be able to deliver. And on top of that, now he became this very marginalized and discredited leader. So that is where we are right now. And I think the PKK, it's always called the shots. And some people argue that the PKK saw the HDP's rise as a threat, and that's why it resumed violence. But I really don't agree with that. I think the PKK is now more focused on what's going on in northern Syria. So that's their priority. So now it's a completely different game. And where we are right now, I think the fighting is likely to accelerate. Just last week, we've seen the PKK down the Turkish helicopter using a Russian-made manpad. And some military analysts are saying that this has never happened before, and some are saying in 1997 they used a manpad, but it's not really confirmed. So whatever it is, this means further escalation. It means the PKK is not going to back down, and neither the government will. Because from Erdogan's perspective, he really needs to appeal to the nationalist voters for the reasons that we've been talking about. So that's his plan, that's what he has in mind. And the PKK, on the other hand, as I just mentioned, this is their moment. And they really think that they are on the verge of declaring, they think they have an autonomous region. They have the backing of the West, of Europe, of the United States. So they have high expectations, and they are overly confident. So they are not willing to back down either. So that's why I think where we are right now, neither party has any motivation to stop the fighting or return to the negotiations.
And just quickly on the HDP, do you expect them to survive as a party? Are they going to run in the next election,
I mean,
if there is one?
It all depends what you mean. I mean, they might not pass the threshold, but...
No, I mean, are people going to be in jail, basically thrown into jail and the party disbanded?
That's highly likely. I mean, there are already so many court cases, and that's happened before, and that's always been the case. Whether they will survive as a party, yes, they will. As long as there's fighting going on, they will always have this Kurdish
HDP.
The HDP.
Yeah. Okay.
They might not make it if they call for early elections today. They might not pass the 10% threshold, but they might revert. They might go back to their original strategy of running as independents.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead of as a
Very
party.
good. There are a lot of questions to ask on foreign policy in Syria and Europe and Russia, United States relations, Israel relations, I know, with Turkey, but we're going to throw it now to the audience. There is a mic, and I see my friend Hillel Fradkin in the back, right back there. Yeah, please.
Thanks very much. I have a technical question.
Well,
on
I'll
the-
just say who you are.
Hilo Fratkin of the Hudson Institute. A technical question. If on these various routes to a new constitution, if the if the HP deputies have their immunity stripped, and if they are brought up on charges, are they still entitled to vote in the parliament or not? Because if they were not, then it might be possible for him to have a majority anyway to pass these amendments. The second question is John raised. What exactly will follow from this for Turkey's foreign policy, and specifically towards Syria?
Who wants to handle that first?
Look, on the
first one?
technical one, maybe well, you're the former parliamentarian, right? My understanding is that if the parliamentarians are actually removed, they have to be replaced, but you need to hit the appropriate majority, either 3/5 or in the case of a referendum, or 2/3 in the case of straight passage of the entire parliament as originally constituted. That is my understanding, and I don't know.
The route would be this. First, the immunities have to be lifted within the parliament, and then a court case will begin, but it'll take a lot of time, meaning calendar doesn't exactly work out. Most people assume that once the immunities are lifted, the deputies lose their seats. Actually, no. There might be a long court case, and only then they might be voted out of the parliament, meaning they might lose their seats. So I think what's more likely for Erdogan to do is continue with the lifting of immunities, try to taint HDP with all these law cases against the deputies. Meanwhile, continue arresting province chairs, co-mayors, and other leading HDP elite, and then call for snap elections, forcing HDP to enter elections as this tainted party where the whole party elite are either in jail or dealing with a court case. So it's, I think, quite likely, just to add on to Gonul and Alan's analysis, I think it's quite likely to push both the MHP and HDP under the 10% threshold this way, rather than sending the HDP MPs out of the parliament and hitting the 5% clause in the Turkish constitution, which makes by-elections necessary. Because if 5% of the seats in the Turkish parliament are vacant for one reason or another, by-elections are necessary. But I don't think that's what Erdogan would prefer, because a snap elections gives him the chance to get everything once and for all.
And I'll take the question on foreign policy. I don't think Davutoğlu.
Can I just on this foreign policy? I mean, just in terms of setting the predicate, there has been serious fighting now in that area on the border north of Aleppo. It's been sounds like it's been a lot of joint U.S. Turkish cooperation. Doesn't sound particularly effective yet in pushing ISIS off of that border, but it does seem to be escalating significantly. There was an article today in I think the Wall Street Journal on the Turkish military and its rise and the role that it's playing in Syria or holding back Erdogan in Syria. So that's kind of the predicate. But if you can expand on that, where this is going.
Sure. I think Davutoğlu's departure hardly means anything for Turkish foreign policy, because he was not really fully in charge of foreign policy. Erdogan is always called the shots. I mean, when he was Erdogan was the prime minister, and when he still does. So I don't think it's going to affect Turkish. No one is expecting a major policy change just because in Turkey's foreign policy just because Davutoğlu is leaving. And especially in Syria, I think Turkey's Syria policy is largely going to be dictated by what's happening on the ground. And we have seen a slight recalibration of Turkey's Syria policy in the recent months because of what's been happening on the ground. But I think Davutoğlu, yes, it was his vision to reach out to the Middle East. He thought that the Middle East was Turkey's backyard. That Turkey needed to be more involved in Middle Eastern affairs. That was his vision, but that vision was shared and approved by Erdogan himself. So that's why I think we won't see a change in Turkey's Syria policy. We could expect slight changes in maybe Turkey's relations with the European Union, but when it comes to the Middle East, I think Turkey is already very marginalized, and at some point it will be forced to recalibrate its policy, but it's not going to be because Davutoğlu is leaving.
Yes, here in the front, Rafi Danziger.
Thank you. I'm Rafi Danziger, an advisor to AIPAC, so naturally I'll ask the Israel question. And my question is, there are many signs that Turkey is really now interested in having a reconciliation agreement with Israel. Most recently, the Turkish ambassador attended the Israeli Independence Party and many other signs of that sort. Do you think it's going to happen? What are the obstacles still preventing it from happening, and do you think it will be overcome? Thank you.
Alan, do you want to start with that?
Okay. Sure. Well, I think both sides want it. And I think Turkey in particular wants it, particularly since the November 24th shoot-down of the Russian Su-24 and Russia's harsh response to that. Turkey has felt particularly isolated in the region. And it wasn't long after that that we really started hearing the Turks make clear that they wanted to move on the Israel front. As far back as December, a Turkish official said, this will happen soon. So why hasn't it happened already 5 months later? I think there are some obstacles. I think from Israel's side, I think there's three key issues. One is they want to see an operational Hamas presence, which Israel is convinced exists in Istanbul. They want to see it removed. Second of all, there was a court case against the 4 Turkish generals. I'm sorry, 4 Israeli court case in Turkey against the 4 Israeli generals who were senior at the time of the Mavi Marmara incident. They want to make sure that that court case is not only ended, but that there will be no subsequent court case. I think that's a problem for the Turkish government, not because they're not willing to pull the strings to end it, but because the IHH, the NGO that really pushed the Mavi Marmara event, opposes ending the case, and the families of those who were killed on the Mavi Marmara also seem to oppose ending it. So Erdogan will have to do some work there. Third of all, and I think this might be the toughest, some of Israel's key foreign partners don't really want to see this happen, or at least they want firm guarantees. Egypt in particular, we know, has major problems with Erdogan. They don't want to see a strong Turkish influence, an Erdogan influence in Gaza. So they'll have to be satisfied on that count. Russia, which is important for Israel in terms of Israel's ability to maneuver in Syria. So Russia is now a neighbor of Israel's in a way I think also has to be satisfied. And Greece, Cyprus, with which Israel has important partnerships, I don't necessarily think they would object, but they may have feelings about it too. So I think those are all tough issues. And from Turkey's point of view, the toughest thing is that Erdogan, who originally said the embargo, who said the blockade of Gaza has to be lifted. Now sometimes the Turks say they call it the embargo, has to be lifted. He needs a face-saving gesture, something that gives Turkey some kind of access to Gaza. Sorry to
Does
go.
anybody want to just
something.
very quickly? Yeah.
There was a Hürriyet Daily News recently interviewed the Israeli Consul General in Istanbul, and I agree Hamas is the main sticking point, but and Turkey I think has taken some steps. Turkey recently deported one of the senior Hamas leaders in Istanbul, and that's a good sign, but I think Israel wants more than that. They want Turkey to change its policy towards Hamas, and that's going to be extremely difficult for the Erdogan government. And the question on lifting the blockade, you're right, and now Turkey is not interested in that. It wants a preferential access to Gaza, and that will certainly benefit Hamas leadership and strengthen Hamas leadership. the more jobs Turkish companies are creating in Gaza, the more powerful Hamas will get, and that's the main issue, I think, for the Israeli side, and that's very difficult to resolve for the Turkish government.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say on the Hamas question, put in a plug for FDD. Our Turkey team here, led by John Shanzer, has done quite unique and important work on the Hamas-Turkey connection, particularly this operational presence inside of Turkey of Hamas. Aykan, very quickly.
Just to give some background on this issue, Erdogan not only wants it, but he believes he needs it. But not only him, but it's also his new allies, because Erdogan is no longer ruling alone. He is ruling together with a military, judicial, bureaucratic alliance, what might be glossed as the establishment. And his new partners want rapprochement very strongly. And Erdogan would like to go forward with it, but he wants to save face, because this is a big U-turn. He has made all sorts of outrageous comments, and it's now a little difficult to backtrack from them. I would argue that as long as Erdogan calls the shots in Turkey with his new partners, it will be very difficult for him to undo the rapprochement, with one exception. I think there is always the nuclear option, and that is for presidentialism. I think the only reason why Erdogan could and would jettison reconciliation could be if he feels desperate that this is the only way to presidential system. But I wouldn't give it more than 10 to 20%.
Is essentially to play the anti-Israel card, you're
yes,
saying.
if he needs.
Yeah. Yes, this gentleman right over here. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm George Mjedlishvili, visiting scholar at Georgetown University. So my first question, is to all.
How many questions? One question.
Okay,
right.
if I'm limited to one question, okay, let me
Okay.
ask the second one. So given the relations with Turkey and the West, particularly Europe, so do you think that today, given Turkey's economic woes, which were exacerbated by the spoiling of the relations with Russia in particular, makes Turkey more vulnerable and more needing Europe that Europe needs Turkey? Okay, in this dynamic, is a bilateral dynamic. And don't you think that today, rather than Turkey playing hardball, okay, with the kind of these refugees, threatening Europe actually to block the access in exchange for this visa liberalization, which it doesn't deserve domestically, given its terrible human rights record of late. Don't you think that Europe should be more proactive and more forceful in trying to improve Turkey? Thank you.
Can somebody just explain, where are we now in this EU-Turkey? There's been so much back and forth. I thought the deal was done and the money had flowed, but where can somebody take that and explain why don't
EU Parliament and EU Commission, they are not on the same page, because a few weeks ago EU Commission basically gave the green light for visa liberalization, and then just a few weeks after that European Parliament said, you know what, no, we said conditions, 72 conditions, and there are 5 that haven't been met yet.
Mostly having to do with issues of human rights?
There is one on changing the anti-terrorism law. The current anti-terrorism law is very vague.
Corruption bill.
There's
Would
a corruption bill,
Yeah.
and there's cooperation between European security officials and Turkish security. So there are 5 conditions that have not been met by Turkey. So they are European Parliament. Of course, it's more sensitive to European public opinion, and that's why Erdogan's harsh rhetoric is not helping the Turkish case. But the EU Commission, Europeans, and as an answer, short answer to the gentleman's question, no, Turkey is not more vulnerable than EU. Erdogan, in fact, feels very strong. I mean, he thinks that the EU is very desperate. So the EU needs Turkey's support more. That's what Erdogan thinks. And I think he's partly right. Europeans they desperately want Turkey to stem the flow of Syrian refugees. But the question is now what's going to happen? You have an EU Commission that is very willing to move forward with the deal, and you have the European Parliament that really wants to think first before doing anything. But I think legally no matter what decision is made, it has to be approved by European governments and the European Parliament. So at the end of the day, you cannot discount what the European Parliament says. So that's why the approach that has taken by Erdogan is not quite wise, because he constantly attacks the EU leaders, European countries, and that is only increasing the anti-Erdoganism that exists in Europe, and that's really pushing the European Parliament's hand.
Can I divide this into two levels? One is the economic level, the other is the political level. Now, my interaction with the EU officials, it revolves around subjective issues. Some of the EU counterparts argue that it's not who needs the other more, but it's more who feels that he has the upper hand. And a lot of the Turkey skeptics in the EU think Turkey plays the cards better. That is, the EU is not aware of the power it has, not only through conditionality attached to the membership process, but also economic, political, diplomatic power it has. That's one issue. But the other issue is, of course, the economic issue. And that is, I just came back from Istanbul, and I had attended a Harvard alumni meeting where the former Deputy Prime Minister and the economy czar, Ali Babacan, spoke. And there was a representation of the Turkish business community. Let me tell you, they feel they're desperately in need of the EU for two reasons. Turkey's FDI comes from the EU, and they think they need the EU. Second, Turkey's only export markets that are stable, that has the absorption capacity of Turkish export products, is the EU. So if you ask Turkey's business community, from the secular liberal end to the very conservative religious end, they all feel Turkey needs the EU desperately, not for diplomatic reasons, but for economic reasons. So I think so far Erdogan has played his cards well, because he pretends as if the EU needs Turkey more than Turkey needs EU, and he has managed to persuade his EU counterparts that this is the case. And as long as this asymmetric assessment continues to be on the table, I think Erdogan will continue to profit from it.
Yeah, very brief.
Yeah, you know, Erdogan is said to have told Juncker last fall, I can flood Europe with refugees. And some Turkish officials, including Yiğit Bulut, his famous chief advisor, has reiterated that publicly. I think Europe is very worried about that, unlike the case where Israel, I think, holds the balance of leverage. In this far more important case, I think Turkey does hold the balance of leverage because of Europe's paranoia about the refugees. I have a feeling you're European and you may have a more informed assessment, but we'll get an answer very soon, because Erdogan has said we're not compromising on the anti-terrorism bill. There is some talk out there. There are possible ways to get around it. If Europe is willing to compromise, to find some way around this, then we'll know that Erdogan has outmaneuvered Europe.
We did have this very strange case in Germany of the comedian who was that was really
That was
odd. Can I just add, has the refugee flow actually now been, is that part of the deal essentially being implemented?
It went into effect March 20th, and they say in April there was a 90% decline in those going illegally from.
And is that a matter of Turkish enforcement primarily on their side?
Yes.
That he really, there is some truth to that.
That's the belief.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
he
that's
can turn
what
it
the
on and off.
reporting is, yes.
Yes, this gentleman here in the back.
Hi, Steve Pavlik with the Cyprus Group. Could you speak to the role that the U.S. plays in subsidizing the opposition movement led by Fethullah Gulen? I guess particularly the Gulen charter schools that are using H-1B visas, more approved than Google, and are requiring the teachers to contribute money back to support the movement. And I guess specifically, do you know what opposition movements are being supported by U.S. taxpayers and just being allowed to occur because of significant political contributions they're making, such as the millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation?
Okay, all right. This I think we get the point. The position of the Gulenists. And does anybody have a particular view on the Gulen and their schools? And Aykan, do you have any knowledge or?
Now the question is a little odd because it's an opposition movement supported by the U.S. I'm not sure whether U.S. supports any opposition movements in Turkey.
I'm quite sure.
Certain it doesn't.
Yeah.
So here is someone. Now, as a former Turkish MP, what I know is Turkish tax money goes into U.S. To various lobbying firms and lawyers to continue the crackdown in Turkey on the Gulen community on the U.S. end. So I think that one is at least certain, that we have concrete evidence that Turkish tax money is used in U.S. To continue the kind of crackdown Turkey has in Turkey on the other side of the ocean.
A little bit far afield from our subject today. Anybody else? Yes, this gentleman in the back.
Bill Jones with Amnesty International. What role, how important is the role on Erdogan's crackdown on the press? Last report I saw, about 800 journalists lost their jobs just since January. Does his control extend to such that very few people know anything except what the authorized press says?
Aykan, do you?
There was a recent stat, I think almost 900 journalists lost their jobs within the last 4.5 months. Yeah. Now, this is, I think, the new face of the pressure, because so far we have been focusing on journalists in prison, and there were always these polemics between Turkish officials and especially EU counterparts and also world journalists about whether they are terrorists or journalists. But now I think there's a new phase. That is, you simply fire journalists, you take over press outlets, you turn them into government mouthpieces, and then you shut them out of business altogether, or you force some of the media families to shut off their own businesses. Just to give you an example, soon after the government initiated a really outrageous case against Doğan family, they decided to first end their very successful Radikal business, which was at first a paper daily, but then an online daily, and it had the best, let's say, coverage online. But they not only shut it off, but they are now about to sell the brand itself. And the brand itself has value too. So I think this is how these families, these media conglomerates are persuaded, quote unquote, to end their businesses and fire their journalists. And I think what we are seeing is a new phase. And the most recent move actually came from within Davutoğlu's inner circle, because Davutoğlu was trying to build these loyal media outlets. And one major outlet was called Yeni Yüzyıl, which was published by the rector of the Haliç University, which is a privately endowed university in Istanbul. So as soon as Davutoğlu was ousted from office, the Turkish Higher Education Council took over that university, run by a loyalist to Davutoğlu, and that rector, the day after the takeover, decided that he will end his Yeni Yüzyıl daily. He turned it into online business, and I think within a couple of weeks we will see that he will shut it off altogether and fire all the journalists. So I think Turkey will move from imprisoning journalists to simply putting them out of workplaces and media outlets.
And I just want to add something,
Yeah,
if
okay,
I can.
quickly,
I think I agree with everything you said. I just want to add that this is a systemic problem that has been exacerbated by the AKP's, by the clientelistic network that was created by the AKP. You rarely go into media business to make money in the media sector in Turkey. You provide favorable coverage for the government, and in return you get government contracts somewhere else. So I think this has been a systemic problem which has been abused by the AKP government, and I think there are very few ways out. I mean, the media sector, they either have to develop a new business model, or you really have to, I don't know how that network of, that clientelistic network is going to be dissolved. So it's a structural problem.
Alan, you want to?
Yeah, I just quickly, because I think you asked, is there any independent news out there? I think basically there are two newspapers of national significance, Cumhuriyet and Hurriyet, which are still somewhat independent. This third one, Zaman, has been closed down and taken over. And the chief editors of both newspapers, Cumhuriyet and Hurriyet, are under indictment. So,
What about TV?
TV, I think it's usually said that 90% of the electronic media is either government-owned or pro-AKP, but I'll defer if somebody has a different.
Basically right. Over here in the corner, please, this gentleman. Can you get over here? Right here, in the front. Thanks.
Ömer Taşpınar, National Defense University. I have a question for Aykan. Aykan, what's going on within your former party, CHP? Any hope of a more effective opposition coming from the CHP? And also, you mentioned that there is a new rapprochement between the Turkish military, nationalist circles, bureaucracy, and AKP. What's, in your view, the future of the Turkish military?
Let me begin by the easier question. That's the latter. And what we're seeing is, you know, one of my favorite quotes is by Winston Churchill. He said, "Politics makes strange bedfellows." So today what we see in Turkey is really a very strange coalition in the making. So Erdogan is not only bringing the military back to the table, not only co-opting Bahçeli's MHP, but we're seeing all the way from the Maoist neo-nationalists to some of the secular xenophobic nationalists coming together on a strange kind of mixed platform of anti-Kurdish feelings, anti-Gulenist feelings, maybe pro-nativist, pro-nationalist feelings, and Erdogan is emerging as the kind of the new symbol of this very broad hybrid coalition. Now, where this will take Turkey is difficult to tell, but I think what we'll see is, I talked to a lot of people all across the board. All the sides seem to believe that they are in charge and they're playing the other side. So all the parties believe they're outsmarting the others, including the Maoist neo-nationalists. I've heard from one of their people saying, you know what, we might receive only 0.2% of the vote, but we now call all the shots in Turkey, they argue. I don't know who's the smartest. I don't know who is really playing the others, but I think ultimately this is a lose-lose coalition. This will further bring Turkey to disaster in the Kurdish question, and in this grand coalition, Turkey will undermine its rule of law, democracy, and pluralism. Now, going to the difficult question, CHP. I think just yesterday, CHP Chair Kılıçdaroğlu said, we're not the MHP. If the intra-party opposition within CHP brings enough signatures, we will immediately hold an extraordinary convention and have leadership change. So I think that has always been one strong point of CHP, that is there is robust intra-party democracy, there can be alternative candidates, and the delegates ultimately have the upper hand. Now, why that's not materializing, meaning why don't we see 4 credible candidates in CHP just as we see with the MHP? I think that's a $1 million question. I really don't have the answer to it, meaning why an MHP that is very closed, very oppressive, manages to produce 4 credible leaders, challengers to Bahçeli, and why CHP, that's known for its very robust intra-party democracy, doesn't have that profile. I think that's something Turkey's opposition need to think about. My prediction, I think in the short run, CHP will have some turbulence around the immunity issue, because CHP is, at the leadership level, committed to lifting of the immunities. My prediction, 90% of the CHP MPs will vote against the immunity. Maybe this was the plan right from the very start. You know, having this facade of not moving with the HDP, but behind the scenes, saving the HDP deputies from their immunities being lifted. Let's see how long this, I don't want to call it a strategy, but this, let's say, short-term tactic can be continued successfully.
Some of the CHP deputies themselves are vulnerable if the immunities are lifted.
Everyone is
Everybody
vulnerable,
is
There are
including
some
the,
court files against.
for example, if I were
Europe.
some of the AKP deputies involved in all sorts of harassment, theft, you know, common criminal activities, I would vote against the lifting of the immunities.
I'm
Just to
going
make
to
sure.
take back the prerogative here. We are in Washington. There is a U.S.-Turkish relationship. I wonder, Alan, if you've got any insight into how people in the U.S. government or policy community are thinking about this growing conundrum of Turkey and all of the negative trajectories. There does seem to be some cooperation on the border north of Aleppo, but we had that serious tensions over the YPG issue in northern Syria. Where are we, or what's your sense of where we are, and how did the U.S. government take this relationship forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exasperation with Erdogan. There has been for some time. I think it goes all the way back, starting with Gezi Park in late May, early June of 2013, and it's gotten worse. Erdogan was here recently. Obama has criticized the media, the restrictions on media freedom. There are deep disagreements that are now long-standing regarding how to approach Syria. Erdogan still feels Assad should be the #1 target, not ISIL. He is extremely upset with our cooperation with YPG, which he sees as cooperation with a terrorist group. I think on the U.S. side, aside from human rights, there is a deep suspicion that's not publicly voiced that Turkey has still not done all it can to crack down on the border and prevent the infiltration of jihadis into Syria, and that it has. I think the U.S. is not comfortable also with some of the Jaish al-Fatah, some of the Victory Army, I guess, groups, fundamentalist groups that Turkey is supporting in Syria. Moving forward, I think it's very difficult to resolve these issues, but I think one that needs to be done is that probably there has to be some understanding between Turkey and the U.S. Of just how far the YPG will move in Syria, how far we want to see them move territorially. It's not simple, but at least maybe we can agree on where certain broad limits are.
Good. Okay, we have reached the end of the time. I just want to do very quick lightning round on this time next year. Will we have Erdogan as the executive president of Turkey? What odds do you? What percentage?
My disaster scenario will be back to 2002 parliament. That is two parties, CHP and AKP will have supermajority, and Erdogan will call all the shots, and it will be a disaster for Turkey and the region.
Gunnar?
I'm afraid I agree.
You agree? Executive in whatever presidency. Alan?
Yeah,
You think that's
I'd give it a 70%.
70%. Okay, great. Everybody, if you could join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time at FTD. Thank you.
Sorry, did I go on too long on that US thing?
No, it was great. It was great. It was important.